They made me sign a contract to stay silent. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of my entire life. My hand trembled so badly I could barely keep the ink steady, and above me their eyes pierced through my skin, making it clear I had no choice. The contract lay in front of me on the table, dense, cold, and full of words I didn't fully understand. All I knew was that I was supposed to sign it, and that saying no wasn't an option. My stepmom stood closest, her shadow stretching across the page as if to remind me who it really belonged to. I had never hated silence until then. The room was dead quiet, except for my uneven breaths and the sound of my heart ricocheting in my chest. Everything about this moment screamed wrong, yet I still pressed the pen down and wrote my name, each stroke digging me deeper into something I already regretted. When I lifted my hand, she snatched the paper away like she was collecting proof of her victory, her lips curling into a satisfied smile that still makes me sick to remember. That signature became my prison. Every time I wanted to speak up, every time I wanted to cry or scream the truth, that paper held me back. 4 lines of ink, my own name, were enough to bury my voice. I wasn't old enough to know about contracts or loopholes or legal jargon. I only knew that I was trapped, silenced by the very people who should have protected me. And as much as I wish that moment had been the start of some twisted nightmare, the truth is this: it was just the culmination. The real story started long before the paper slid across the table, back when my voice was already being chipped away piece by piece. Silence wasn't new to me, it was the language of my childhood. In our house, speaking up was a kind of crime, and the punishment came quietly too, in looks that cut sharper than words or in days of coldness that felt like exile. If I dared to complain, the answer was always the same: stop exaggerating, or why can't you be more like your sibling? Eventually, I learned it was easier, safer, to just swallow my words and let my voice rot inside. My sibling was the golden one, the sun they all orbited around. If they got a bad grade, it was the teacher's fault. If they lied about something, it was brushed off as a joke. Meanwhile, I lived under a microscope. A grade that was 1 point lower than perfect was laziness. If I laughed too loud, I was attention-seeking. If I stayed quiet, I was moody. I existed in that constant state of being wrong. No matter what I did, it could always be twisted. The comparisons were endless. They got new clothes, praise, and freedom. I got lectures, chores, and the occasional vicious reminder that I was lucky to even have what I did. At family gatherings, relatives would coo over my sibling while I stood off to the side, invisible but still somehow too much when I opened my mouth. Little by little, I started to believe the narrative they forced on me, that I was the difficult one, that my thoughts were meaningless. There was a rhythm in the house that everyone followed without question. My stepmom's voice was law, my dad's silence her echo, my sibling the beneficiary of every decision. Me, I was more like a shadow, present but dismissed, tolerated as long as I didn't disrupt their carefully constructed image of a happy family. Looking back, I can see how perfectly they trained me for what came later. By the time the contract slid across the table, I was already primed to keep quiet. Years of being told to shut up had left scars so deep I didn't even recognize them as wounds. Silence had become survival. If I spoke up, it meant punishment or humiliation. If I stayed quiet, at least I was ignored, and being ignored hurt less. That's the truth of my childhood. The silence wasn't born the day I signed my name on that paper. No, the silence had been inside me for years, passed down in every look, every dismissal, every reminder that in this family, my voice never really belonged to me. It all came crashing down the night of the incident the night that changed everything and made silence not just a habit but a command. It started off deceptively ordinary. We were supposed to be having dinner together, one of those rare evenings where my dad was actually home instead of buried in work. My stepmom wanted everything perfect, which usually meant everyone pretending, sitting upright, smiling like mannequins, but perfection shattered quickly. My sibling, her golden child, had been spiraling for months, though no one said a word about it. Where they failed, excuses bloomed to cover it up. This time it was worse. I'll never forget the sound, the shatter of glass, a scream that didn't sound real, and then chaos. I walked into the living room to see my sibling standing over a mess so dark and violent my brain struggled to process it. An accident, they said, a mistake. But the truth was obvious. Something reckless, dangerous, something that would have ruined the pristine image my stepmom crafted of our happy family. I remember standing in the doorway, frozen, staring at what they had done. My dad was pale, his voice sharp but shaking as he muttered, "Clean this up now. No one can know." My stepmom whipped her head toward me, her eyes wild, and hissed, "Don't say a word, do you understand me?" But I couldn't stop myself. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could cage them. "We have to tell someone, this isn't right." It felt like my voice cracked something open in the room. My stepmom's hand slammed down on my shoulder, her nails digging like claws. Her face hovered inches from mine, her whisper more terrifying than a scream. "If you speak, your life is over. Do you hear me? They won't look at them as the failure, they'll look at you. They'll say you're unstable, vindictive. Do you want to destroy this family? Do you want to destroy yourself?" I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to scream, to drag the truth into the light, but their fear started seeping into me. My dad barked at me to leave the room, his voice so cold it felt like a door slamming shut inside me. And my sibling just stared at me with wide, frantic eyes, like a plea and a warning rolled into one. The next morning, it was like nothing had happened. The mess was gone, the carpet scrubbed. My stepmom served breakfast in her usual spotless apron while humming under her breath. My sibling grinned sheepishly across from me, their image polished, untouchable again. I sat there clutching my spoon, nauseous because I couldn't unsee what I saw. None of us could, but I was the only one not allowed to forget and not allowed to speak. I tried once more to bring it up. 2 days later, I told my dad quietly, "We can't just ignore it. It's not right." He slammed his hand down on the table so hard I jumped. "Drop it, for your own good." He didn't even look me in the eye. My stepmom's warning echoed louder in my head, "Your life is over if you talk." That was when the world around me shrank to a cage. I realized it wasn't just about the secret, it was about control. They weren't protecting my sibling, they were protecting their image, and if silencing me was the cost, they were more than willing to pay it. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, the horror of what I saw, and the terror they carved into me when I tried to speak was only the beginning, because the next step was to make sure I never opened my mouth again. I'll never forget the night they shoved the papers in front of me. It wasn't a conversation, it was an ambush. I walked into the dining room thinking my dad wanted to talk, maybe for once he'd actually hear me out. But when I sat down, my stepmom slid a thick stack of papers across the table. At the top, in bold letters, was the word agreement. My blood went cold. She leaned forward, voice syrupy sweet but sharp enough to slice me in half. "This is for the good of the family," she said. "You'll sign it and we'll never have to worry about misunderstandings again." My dad sat beside her like a carved statue, his lips tight, his silence speaking louder than words. My sibling was nowhere to be seen, but their shadow stretched across every page. I skimmed the lines, though most of them blurred together. It was all formal words and legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't allowed to talk. Not about what I'd seen that night, not about what went on in our house. Not to friends, not to teachers, not even to anyone outside the family, under penalty of consequences. I remember asking, my voice breaking, "What if I don't sign?" My dad finally looked at me then, his eyes hard. "Then you'll ruin us. Do you really want to carry that guilt?" My stepmom's hand pressed the pen into mine. "It's simple, you sign and we move forward. You keep your mouth shut and nobody gets hurt." Tears blurred my vision, dripping onto the pages. "I'm just a kid," I whispered. "This isn't fair." But that only made her smile crueler. "Then it'll be easier for you to do as you're told." They didn't yell, they didn't drag me, but that made it worse. Their calm made it feel inevitable. In the end, my hand betrayed me. It shook so badly I could barely form the letters of my name, but I signed anyway. The pen scraped across the paper like chains snapping around my wrists. My stepmom snatched the contract back before the ink even dried, tucking it into a folder with that same unnerving satisfaction, like she'd just locked me inside a cage I couldn't escape. Walking away from that table, my chest was hollow. Something inside me had been stolen, my voice, my choices, my right to be heard, all traded for the illusion of family protection. What I didn't realize then was that it wasn't just a piece of paper I had signed. It was the beginning of years of silence that almost destroyed me. After I signed that contract, life stopped feeling like mine. It was like slipping invisible cuffs over my wrists. No one else could see them, but I felt their weight every second of every day. The paper was hidden away in some drawer, yet its presence haunted me more than any locked door or raised voice ever could. Whenever I thought about speaking, even whispering the truth, I'd see my stepmom smirk and hear my dad's cold warning, "You'll ruin us." At school, I tried to act normal, but inside I was crumbling. My best friend once asked me why I seemed so distant lately, why I avoided sleepovers or went quiet whenever she asked about home. The words nearly burst out of me. I almost said, "You don't know what they made me do. You don't know what I'm hiding." But just as quickly I felt it, the phantom weight of that contract pressing against my chest. In my mind's eye, those pages glared back at me, daring me to break them. Instead, I smiled and lied, "I'm just tired." Teachers noticed too. One day, my English teacher pulled me aside after class. "You haven't seemed yourself lately. Is everything okay at home?" My throat tightened, my tongue aching to spill everything. But I froze, imagining my stepmom waving the contract in my face, reminding me of the penalty of consequences. What if they dragged me into court? What if they twisted it until I looked unstable or vengeful? My silence would protect me, I told myself, even as it suffocated. All I managed to mumble was, "Yeah, I'm fine." She gave me a look full of kindness that cut me deeper than any cruelty at home, because I knew I had just thrown away a lifeline. Even around extended family, the mask never slipped. During holidays, when relatives asked me casually about school or the future, my answers came rehearsed, short, pleasant. But the truth churned beneath my skin. I'd look down at my plate, pretending to be engrossed in mashed potatoes, while my stepmom smiled across the table, her eyes latching onto mine like invisible chains, yanking me back into place. The paranoia became unbearable. Every time my phone buzzed, I was terrified it was her, checking if I was keeping my mouth shut. Every time my dad called my name, I wondered if it was to remind me of my responsibilities. I couldn't even cry freely anymore because I imagined someone finding me, holding out that contract and whispering, "Remember your promise. Remember what silence you owe us." The guilt was another beast. Part of me resented myself for signing, for caving, for letting them corner me. But part of me also carried a twisted responsibility. If I spoke, if I broke the silence, wouldn't I be the one to destroy the family? It was like they had poisoned me with their narrative, and every day I replayed it until I started to believe it. That maybe my silence was noble. Maybe I was protecting something bigger than myself. But deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't protecting my family, I was protecting their lies. I was burying myself so they could stand taller in the world's eyes. And each time I was forced to paste on a smile, to laugh like nothing was wrong, the paper chains yanked tighter, reminding me that I wasn't free. I was living in a prison I had signed with my own hand, and the worst part was convincing everyone else that nothing was wrong, even as I disappeared a little more each day. It didn't take long for the silence to start eating me alive. At first I thought I could manage it, keep the secret buried deep inside, smile when I needed to smile, swallow back the words clawing at my throat. But silence is heavy. It doesn't stay politely tucked away, it presses itself against your chest, gnaws at your stomach, seeps into your sleep. Soon I wasn't wasn't sleeping at all. Night stretched on endlessly, me staring at the ceiling, heart racing, replaying that night over and over in my head. Sometimes I'd jolt awake from dreams where my stepmom stood at the end of my bed, the contract in her hand, whispering that I'd never escape her grip. Exhaustion made every day harder. In class, I'd doze off mid-lesson, my head snapping up just as people started to laugh. I could barely focus on assignments. What was the point of essays or algebra when my real life was a prison? But somehow, even as I was unraveling, my sibling was thriving. Their grades shot up, their sports awards doubled, their social status soared. Teachers gushed over their impeccable behavior. Our parents glowed with pride every time their name was mentioned. And I sat there, the silent backdrop to their growing legacy. The sickest part of it all, their success was built on the lie I was forced to keep. Without my silence, the world would know the truth about them, about that night, about everything. Every time I watched them step on stage to collect another award or post smiling pictures online, the weight of that lie pressed harder on my chest. Each applause for them sounded like a laugh at my expense. I started breaking in small ways, little cracks that bled through the silence. Once I scribbled a note in the margins of my notebook. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but something bad happened. I tore out the page quickly and stuffed it in my pocket, the words trembling on the edge of exposure, but it ended up shredded in the trash because fear still ruled me. Another time, walking home with a friend, I almost let it slip. She asked why I look so tired all the time, and I whispered, because I can't say what's happening. Her eyes widened, but I laughed it off before she could ask questions, claiming I was joking. My heart pounded for hours afterward, half in terror that she'd press me, half in longing that she would. The cracks didn't just show in small rebellions, they showed in me. My body carried the silence like a disease. I chewed at my nails until they bled. My hands shook randomly, even when holding something light like a pencil or a spoon. My appetite disappeared, food tasted like ash. The weight on my shoulders became so crushing that there were nights I sat in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, wondering how long I could keep surviving like this. And yet those little cracks also carried something I hadn't felt in a long time: anger. As much as I was drowning in paranoia, part of me began to realize silence was worse than punishment. The punishment was already here. I was punished every day in the form of guilt, insomnia, isolation. What more could they take from me if I spoke? What power could that paper possibly have if it had already stolen almost everything I loved about being alive? That question haunted me, but it also sparked something, a stubborn ember that refused to die. I started imagining what it would feel like to scream the truth out loud, to burn that contract into ashes. I wanted to taste freedom even for a second. And though I was still caged, still clawing at invisible walls, those cracks in my silence whispered a promise. One day this would break. Not just me, their perfect illusion, their carefully constructed world. And maybe when it did, the silence wouldn't belong to me anymore. It would belong to them. For the longest time, that contract lived in my head as if it were iron bars. I didn't even need to see it. The memory of my shaky signature was enough to silence me before I could utter a word of truth. But one day, months after signing it, curiosity gnawed at me so badly that I couldn't ignore it. I had to know exactly what power this paper held over me. It started small. In the school library, while pretending to work on a history project, I typed phrases into the computer. Can minors sign contracts? Are family agreements legally binding? My breath caught when article after article popped up saying the same thing. Minors can't be held to most contracts. The words blurred as I reread them over and over again. Wait, so my signature meant nothing, not to the law, not to anyone. The only place it held weight was inside my fear. My hands shook as I dug deeper. I found legal blogs explaining how contracts signed under duress or manipulation rarely stood up in court. Another explained that agreements without proper oversight were essentially worthless documents. It felt like my chest was splitting open. I'd been living with this iron cage wrapped around me, when in reality those bars were paper thin. Still, part of me didn't trust just random articles. I needed confirmation. So I took the biggest risk yet. I confided in someone. It was during a meeting with the school counselor, one of those check-ins I usually fake my way through. She asked how things were at home, and instead of saying fine, I whispered, what if someone made a kid sign a contract to stay quiet about something? Her face shifted immediately. She sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing with concern. Sweetheart, she said carefully, that wouldn't be legally enforceable. A child can't sign away their rights. Not like that. If someone told you otherwise, they were lying to scare you. Her words left me reeling. It felt like the ground wobbled beneath me, like I had been holding my breath for months and suddenly drew in air for the first time. All that pressure, all that guilt had been built on nothing but manipulation. They hadn't chained me with law, they had chained me with fear. I walked home that day in a daze, every click of my shoes on the sidewalk echoing louder than before. My whole life had been warped by a lie. The contract wasn't power. The power was in how much I believed in it. And I had believed so fully that I let them shrink me into silence, even when the lock was imaginary. That realization shook me in equal parts fury and relief. Fury, because I had wasted so many nights tearing myself apart when I could have spoken. Relief, because now I knew I could speak. I wasn't bound. The contract they made me sign was worthless, and for the first time, I understood that my voice had more power than their paper ever did. That was the turning point. The chains weren't physical and they weren't legal, they were psychological. And once I saw them for what they were, I began to feel the cracks widen again, except this time I wasn't scared. I was ready to pull those chains apart and finally make myself heard. The day I finally decided to act, I thought my heart might burst through my chest. The knowledge that the contract was worthless sat in my mind like a lit match, daring me to set everything on fire. Still, years of fear don't disappear overnight. Whenever my stepmom's eyes landed on me, I felt that old, familiar tightening in my throat. But every time I remembered the counselor's steady voice, *A minor can't be bound by that *. asterisk. I felt the chains loosen just a little more. My first chance came on a Sunday afternoon. We were at my grandmother's house for dinner, one of those family gatherings where everyone pretended we were a picture-perfect clan. The table was crowded, dishes steaming with food, voices rising and falling in shallow laughter. My siblings sat glowing in their golden child aura, telling stories of their latest achievements while my stepmom chimed in, every word dripping with pride. My father nodded along, the silent supporter he had always been. I sat across from them, my hands trembling under the table. I had rehearsed some version of this moment 100 times in my mind. The fear screamed at me to stay quiet, to keep playing my role. But then my siblings smirked at me across the table and said slyly, "Don't look at them for advice, they don't know how to handle responsibility." The whole table chuckled. The same old humiliation. Only this time, instead of shrinking, I felt the ember inside me roar. I put down my fork with a deliberate clink. "You want to talk about responsibility?" My voice shook, but I didn't stop. "Maybe we should talk about the night you all forced me to sign a fake contract so I wouldn't tell anyone what really happened." The room went silent, like someone had pulled the plug on the noise. Forks froze midair. My grandmother furrowed her brow in confusion. My dad's eyes snapped to mine, wide with warning. My stepmom's face drained of color, then quickly morphed into a too sweet, calculated smile. "Don't be dramatic," she said, her voice laced with that same venom I knew too well. "You must have misunderstood." "No," I cut her off louder this time. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't misunderstand. I remember everything. I remember that night. I remember you telling me if I spoke, my life was over. And I know now that none of it was even legal. You just wanted to shut me up so your perfect image wouldn't crack." My father looked like I had struck him in the face. "Lower your voice," he muttered, but it was too late. The truth had already landed in the center of the table like a bomb. "You all let me believe I was trapped," I went on, my words spilling faster now. I could feel tears burning in my eyes, but I let them flow. "You let me drown in silence so I gestured at my sibling, could keep shining, and so you asterisk." My eyes cut to my stepmom, "could keep playing the hero." "Well, I'm done. I'm not staying silent anymore." Gasps spread across the table. My grandmother's lips parted as she slowly shook her head, the shock plain on her face. A cousin stared awkwardly at their plate, clearly wishing the floor would swallow them whole. My sibling looked furious, their perfect mask cracking as red crept up their neck. My stepmom's nails dug into the tablecloth, her composure slipping with each second. The silence that followed was suffocating, but inside me, deep in the pit of my chest, something felt lighter than it had in years. Terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time, I'd chosen asterisk me over their control. And in that unbearable frozen moment, with an entire room staring at me, I realized this was only the beginning. Fear hadn't left me, but I had finally proven I could speak louder than it. The fallout was instant and violent, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to cut me open. My stepmom was the first to recover from the shock. She forced out a laugh so brittle it cracked mid-sound and stood up from the table, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is absurd," she said loudly, trying to rise above the whispers already passing between relatives. "She's making up stories again. You all know how dramatic she can be." But the tremor in her hands betrayed her. My grandmother narrowed her eyes, watching her closely. For the first time, someone else seemed to notice the cracks I had lived with all along. My sibling's face twisted with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about," they spat at me, their voice trembling. "You always twist everything to make yourself look like a victim. You're jealous because no one ever trusted you." "Trusted me?" I shot back, my voice raw and rising. "You all forced me into silence. You let me think I had no choice, no voice, no life beyond your lies. And you," my finger aimed squarely at them, my whole body shaking, "you let me take the fall for everything while you thrived on it." Gasps circled the room. My father finally stood, his face pale but his brow furrowed in a way I had never seen before. "Enough." His voice was low, heavy. He turned to my stepmom. "She's just a kid. Did you really make her sign something like that?" Her mask nearly shattered right there. "It wasn't real, it was just," she stammered, then stopped herself, realizing every word only confirmed what I'd said. Her perfect facade slipped away like water draining from a cracked vase. My dad's silence then was deafening. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes, a clashing mix of rage at her, guilt at himself, and horror at what had been allowed to grow under his roof. He had kept himself blind because it was easier, because believing in her performance meant he didn't have to face his own failures. But he wasn't blind anymore. The room erupted. My grandmother demanded answers. My siblings shouted denials. My stepmom begged for everyone to calm down. It was chaos swirling around me, but at the center of it all I felt eerily steady. Because this time they couldn't shut me up by waving that contract in my face. This time their word games couldn't erase mine. The perfect family act was fractured beyond repair. I could see it in the way relatives avoided meeting her eyes, in the way my siblings' outburst exposed how fragile their shine had always been, in the way my father crumbled as the truth finally settled on his shoulders. The house they had built on control, lies, and silence was collapsing in front of everyone. And for once I wasn't buried beneath the rubble. I was the one who pushed the first stone loose. Looking back now, I can still see myself hunched over that table, pen shaking in my hand, tears soaking the page I thought would seal my fate. For so long I believed that signature was the end of me, that my voice had been stolen and I would never be more than a shadow inside my own life. That paper felt like chains. But what I know now is that paper only had power because they convinced me to give it power. It wasn't the ink that trapped me, it was the fear. For years they thrived on my silence. They built their image, their control, their lies, all on the back of my silence. And every time I obeyed, every time I swallowed words I knew were true, it gave them more. But what no one ever tells you is that silence is never neutral. It doesn't preserve peace, it preserves abuse. It doesn't protect the vulnerable, it protects the ones who exploit them. The day I finally spoke, spoke, my hands trembling and my voice cracking. I thought the sky would fall. Instead, the opposite happened. The lies collapsed, the illusion burned, and in the middle of the rubble, I realized my voice had never truly been gone. It had only been buried, waiting for me to dig it up again. Now, every time I think of that contract, I don't see chains anymore. I see proof of how far I've come, from a kid too scared to say a word, to someone who tore down a system of control with nothing but the truth. My voice, once considered worthless, turned out to be my sharpest weapon. And if there's one thing I want anyone to take from my story, it's this. Silence doesn't make the pain go away. Speaking does. Even if your voice shakes, even if the world tries to bury it, even if they hand you a contract meant to steal it, remember, no paper can define you. Your truth belongs to you, and when you finally let it out, it has the power to break every chain.